Hey, it's Ephruz here to talk about stuff that's been going on at CES. And for the final day, I wanted to talk about two companies that I really think are looking to make an impact in the market this year. And those two companies are going to be ASUS and EVGA. And the reason why I think they're going to make a huge impact on the market is because they are entering sectors of hardware that they have never been in before. And in this case, we're talking about a lot of potential shift in the market in regards to how other brands are going to fare now that ASUS and EVGA are coming for those markets. So I have some articles open here that mostly show a plethora of products that are being announced by ASUS and EVGA. I'm not talking about any specific products in this video, but I am talking about several different kinds of pieces of technology that both of them are releasing. So ASUS is obviously known mostly for motherboards, graphics cards, and monitors, and they're going to be doing a lot more than that, especially in the gaming market this year. So they have their list of motherboards here on their upcoming gear, just newer generation of Maximus motherboards with newest generations of highest end features and RGB lighting. I don't really think there's a whole lot to talk about here because this is just their highest end stuff. Higher end stuff has become more and more predictable as of late in terms of like, oh, this new technology is out. It's probably going to be on the next generation of motherboards in some way, shape, or form. So beyond that, the only thing I really think I should bring up is the fact that RGB LEDs have entered motherboards pretty much everywhere. And the thing that I think is important about ASUS's motherboards in that sense is ASUS Aura. Now, ASUS Aura lets you synchronize any ASUS branded RGB devices that have ASUS Aura software together, which means that with the keyboard and mice that they're releasing, which I'll talk about in a second, and other ASUS components like their ROG Strix graphics cards, they're going to support this RGB synchronization. And they've also partnered with NZXT for an ability to sync with the Noctis 450, which I talked about in a previous video, which I'll link somewhere on the screen, probably in the eye. But basically what this allows is that I think ASUS is really trying to like rule the world in terms of one person can buy exclusively ASUS supported hardware in almost every facet. You can get an ASUS motherboard with RGB lighting, an ASUS ROG Strix graphics card with RGB lighting, an NZXT Noctis 450 ROG, which will support ASUS Aura, a ROG Claymore, a Gladius 2 mouse, and one of their monitors. And then all you would need from ASUS is like a headset, and you're pretty much fully decked out in ASUS gear. If you're a streamer, I think if you believe you're popular enough, it's time to get in contact with ASUS, because if you're sponsored by ASUS, it seems like you could get 90% of your PC components from them. So here I just show more of their motherboards. This looks nice. Showing Z270 motherboards as well. All these are Z270 motherboards. None of the motherboard companies are showing off the AM4 Plus motherboards. I'm not entirely sure why, or AM4 motherboards, not AM4 Plus. I'm not sure why, because this chip is supposed to be coming out in this quarter. So unless motherboards are still in development, and these are just coming out extremely soon, I don't understand why I haven't seen anything regarding that, aside from what AMD has shown us. Now, this is actually a motherboard I want to talk about because I think this is very important and should be in every motherboard, because a lot of M.2 SSD makers, with the exception of Samsung, for some reason don't think having a black PCB on a high-end SSD is worth it, when in reality, considering how much a lot of them cost, I feel like it should be a requirement in terms of aesthetic matching. But now you don't need to worry about that because ASUS put a shroud over their M.2 slot on this motherboard. I would like to see it on their other motherboards, but it's not as necessary, since chances are those are going to be covered by graphics cards. In this case, your M.2 SSD is above the graphics card. So they have fully assembled systems. I've never really been a fan of pre-built. This in particular I find strange because due to the angle, the graphics card has to put more effort into pushing air at a downward angle as opposed to it being the other way around. So I'm not a fan of that. But beyond that, I guess like this works out for people who want to buy pre-built systems but don't want to buy from pre-built companies. Instead, just want to buy as much hardware as they possibly can from a manufacturer that actually deals with all that hardware. One thing that's a nice touch is that here they basically cover the graphics cards, so chances are they're probably using reference cards. And obviously, for some reason, NVIDIA has still not implemented an RGB LED in their GeForce GTX logo, so it would definitely not match. So this is a nice touch. This doesn't make sense to me. It has a red solid accent in RGB lighting, so it's like, what's the point? Just make the RGB lighting red or make this black. And then I talked about their monitors in a previous video, which I'll link in the eye. And then their laptops, which are new upgrades to their ROG laptop line, which basically just has the latest hardware. I don't think you're going to be seeing a whole lot more in terms of features than you have in the previous laptops, because this is their highest end stuff. You can see the I/O looking here. I'm not sure if that's Thunderbolt 2 and that's Thunderbolt 3, or if that's USB Type-C and that's mini DisplayPort, or if that's Thunderbolt 3 and that's mini DisplayPort, but either way, this is just a fully featured device. And then they obviously have their laptop, their water-cooled notebook, which I believe comes with this suitcase. I'm not entirely positive, but I find the suitcase kind of purposeless. Not because it isn't useful in carrying your water cooling unit around, but I think it would have been appropriate to make a larger suitcase that holds both the water cooler and the laptop. Otherwise, it would have probably been better to have this in a briefcase instead of a suitcase. I feel like the suitcase is a little too much for just the water cooler, but a little too small for both. Then they have their lower end laptops. I actually remember looking these up. They have models. They have this model with a GTX 1050 Ti in it, and it doesn't really seem to compete with a lot of other laptops in terms of what I/O you get for the money. I feel like at the prices that I've been seeing this laptop, Alienware is going to have some new customers. The Gladius 2 gaming mouse, I really like what they've done to update this mouse. There's this RGB ring under it, which I feel like is going to look really nice with the ROG Claymore, especially and then there's other elements of the design that fit there as well in both of these mice actually, such as this texture on the side. It's the same as what's on the ROG Claymore, and then beyond that, they don't really seem to have changed anything in terms of the shape of the mouse. So basically, this is just more stuff to enhance your RGB lighting experience. Now, out of all of these mice, I would get this because this one has the best sensor. These two are like out of my realm of consideration, for me at least. And then they've announced their first gaming microphone, or first high-end microphone in general. I'm not sure what the internals are of this. I remember that the Razer Siren had the same internals as the Blue Yeti, so they were fairly similar in that sense, aside from what any kinds of tweaks that Razer's done to the hardware. Now, I think this doesn't look as ugly as people have been saying it does. It looks like you are supposed to talk into the top of the microphone, given how small this area is here. Beyond that, I feel like, based on what I've seen, that it is a relatively compact, professional microphone for streaming types, as opposed to professional audio types. It's people who make music, people who do vocals and stuff like that. I feel like this is not directed towards them as much, because this stuff to me looks like when you're watching a stream, you're going to see this big bright ASUS ROG logo. And then they didn't show the Claymore in that list of hardware, so I decided to open this up. I wish this was USB Type-C. It really is a stronger, more reliable connector. However, this This right here means that it should lock in place a little bit better, so we won't have to worry as much about that as we otherwise would on a lot of other devices. I honestly think this keyboard looks nice. I think the texture is quite subtle. Everything is under very strict, very bright lighting at CES, so you have to consider that these devices are going to have their details more accentuated in the light. In a house, I think this would look much better, just because the texture is obviously a lot more subtle. Now, I would change these keycaps like I would with pretty much every keyboard, but beyond that, I think this, in combination with the Gladius 2 mouse, are going to be what I recommend most people if they want a 10 keyless keyboard. Just because the numpad part I think might be a little bit too expensive for some people. This might be what I recommend people go to, because with all the other peripheral brands, I feel like there is something small enough that is a problem that I feel like limits my ability to recommend it to a massive amount of people, because I have to specify, well, if you fit this niche in terms of what you want for your devices, this will fit you. But I feel like this is a fairly standard shape ergonomic mouse with a 10 keyless keyboard that have similar textures, appearances, lighting experiences. It's very consistent. We don't see any kinds of generational divide in hardware releases, in the sense that some companies, when they release their hardware, they change their logo in between, or they change their sensors in between, or they change their branding in between, or they change their main theme colors in between, and you end up running into this concoction of hardware that doesn't actually truly go together 100%. So I feel like ASUS has done a good job with that. We'll see what happens in terms of what kind of competition this adds to the market, or whether it's just going to be yet another keyboard. So moving on to EVGA, I really like what EVGA is doing this year in terms of also seeming to try and rule the world. They had a keyboard and a mouse at Computex, I believe, that they didn't really show off as like a feature product, but it was there. And I believe I talked about that actually in the Computex 2015 video. So that was quite a bit ago. They also have mice, and then they've all had motherboards for a bit, graphics cards for a bit, power supplies for a bit, and now they are going to have radiators, AIO liquid coolers, quick disconnect coolers, and a quick release graphics card. And what this basically means is that I feel like with EVGA you are experiencing the same thing with ASUS, where you have almost all of your hardware can come from one brand. And the difference between EVGA and ASUS in this sense is that EVGA is not putting RGB lighting in any of their hardware. And if you're somebody who isn't a fan of how everything has rainbows on it now, this is very good news for you. I feel like with the motherboards, these graphics cards and these AIOs, and you end up having a EVGA mouse and keyboard, if they ever actually release that keyboard. It's been quite a while. I haven't seen anything about it. You're going to have a pretty complete EVGA branded system. Also, EVGA, unlike ASUS, is making cases. I have this article loaded specifically for this case. It is a DG7, and the thing that's important about it is that it is a lot more modest of a case compared to EVGA's older cases. And what this means is that we might actually see EVGA finally break into the case market. A lot of people say this looks like an S340. I guess in terms of how drastic people have made the cases look, but I think aside from that, the S340 was a very baseline looking case. Like, this is what you start with in terms of the appearance of a case for most people. There's so much you can do with a box. So EVGA is looking for feedback regarding this case. I think this DG7 logo should go straight up. I want a clean side panel window. I'm hoping that these screws aren't going to damage the windows in any way, because I don't want to run into a situation where a lot of people might start complaining about losing grommets or rubber washers for these screws. So I would like to see this case come with a few extras of those. Beyond that, it seems like a very complete system. They don't show it in these pictures, but you can fit, I believe, a 360 or 280 mil rad here. I'm not sure what the max is. 240 mil rad up here, a 120 mil rad over here, and I think that's pretty much it. So what that means is that unlike the S340, you are going to have actually greater water cooling potential out of this. And this is good news for their water cooling line. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is exactly what it was for. This case being designed for their quick release products. Personally, I want to see if it's possible to chain multiple AIOs or quick release radiators in a system, because I feel like with a 360 mil rad in the front of this case, a 240 mil rad in the top of this case, a 120 mil rad in the back of this case, and all of it being chained to the CPU water block, which is here. They're not really focusing on it very much. I think it's on this article. Yeah, here. All that connected to the CPU water block and this quick release GPU, or two autoplay videos. I'm not sure if you can actually put two of these in a loop, but that would be very good news in terms of creating a fully functional water cooling system. Though this is a 1080, I would like to see them have a 1080 Ti version of this, because I feel like come the next generation of hardware, quick release might actually be a hardware that a lot of people will be able to buy on the used market for much more affordable prices, if they are somebody who wants a longer lasting in terms of PCBs and not actually being so hot, longer lasting pieces of hardware. Now for their motherboards, they've released two new ATX, looks like a eATX motherboard, an ATX motherboard, and an MITX motherboard. I think the ITX one would be the most interesting, but I feel like EVGA is aesthetically downgrading from the from the Stinger Wi-Fi, which I believe is the Z97 version and the Z170 Stinger. I feel like this is not as good looking of a motherboard, and I feel like ASUS is really looking like they might be the they might have the premier MITX board. So I guess that's all I wanted to talk about for today. CES is officially over. I really like this year in terms of how much more consumer-friendly hardware is coming out, and how much more customization and personalization you're going to have with the devices that are coming out, especially RGB LEDs. I know some people really don't like it, but I think the RGB LEDs really add massive amounts of potential to personalization, because up until this point we've been seeing a lot of black, a lot of white, and a lot of red, and not a lot of other colors. So I welcome RGB LEDs in this sense. Though spectrum cycling is not necessarily something that I prefer doing. I prefer random colors being created with some kind of script in a system. I'm not necessarily... that's what I prefer, at least. So I like stuff like the raindrop feature on Ducky's keyboards, or the default LED cycling on the Ducky Secret. That's the kind of stuff I like if I want RGB LEDs in general, or I would just keep it at a plain white. Beyond that, I think the RGB LEDs are exactly what people are looking for in terms of making builds their own. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.